it's so outside of like what I respect about this person. It seems like she's taking one thing and letting it break her principles into a million pieces. And I cannot for the life of me understand it. We can learn a lot from the way that RFK is being kind of received, discussed, and handled. But we'll like shine light on the kind of our current situation. That's really more, aside from the fact that I'm a supporter of his, of course, but like, and I like talking about it because it's fun. But it does tell us more, and there's more in there that we can dig into. Now, he was on Breaking Points. Breaking Points is my go-to news outlet. I love Crystal and Sagar. I think it's good to have kind of a more pragmatic lefty perspective from Crystal. That being said, I do find that she fails to evolve her ideas. She's maybe a little more outspoken about those than Sagar, so I don't really have the same criticism for him. But I think that she doesn't really confront hard reality sometimes. That's okay though. I appreciate that. I think there's some beauty in that. I think there's value in that kind of discourse, and I like that. I respect Crystal, and I respect Sagar as well. That being said, and this is going to sound really harsh, she made a fool of herself in this interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And it's hard for me to even look at it the same way. Like these Crystal and Sagar talk a big game about journalistic integrity, objectivity, yada, 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 right? Which is great. But if you're going to say things like that, if you're going to talk that game, you got to show up, with a full clip here. Like you've really got to show up informed, educated, with quality discourse. You can't wade into something like that haphazardly, or it'll blow up in your face, which is exactly what it did. And it's not just me saying this. Like the comments on these videos are 85% in agreement with what I'm saying here. I wasn't sure if it was just me. I wasn't really, I didn't know, but like I was upset about this, and it really let me down, And it's not that I have like some kind of allegiance with these people, but they are my go-to people for this kind of stuff. Like Kyle Kalinski's kind of just like, he's so assured of his own rightness that it's kind of annoying. Hassan Piker is a joke. On the other side, Ben Shapiro is so self-righteous and sanctimonious, which is why he loves Ron DeSantis so much. Like there's so much of that going on where it's like, I get to hear Crystal and Sagar just kind of shoot the shit, and it's good. Talk about what's going on. And because I don't really want to be that invested in it all the time anymore, it's good to just get like an overview of what seems to matter. But we're going to play this entire debate about vaccines between Crystal and RFK here. And we're going to kind of just break it down piece by piece. It's about 9 minutes. So we're just going to jump into this and discuss kind of what was going on here and really why she was even in this position, because she is very much in support of Marianne Williamson, who officiated her wedding, who is a dear friend of hers, which seems awesome. I think Marianne is a great person. I don't think she's capable of winning this election by any stretch of the imagination. And I think her ideas are a little bit outdated. They kind of resonated more in 2016. And we're going to talk a little bit about that through this as well. But I like Marianne, and I'd like for her to have a role in any administration, just because I think she is a principled human being and a very thoughtful human being. And yeah, I have a lot of respect for her. But Marianne has very similar opinions when it comes to pharma and the vaccine industry that Robert F. Kennedy does. Right. So they share these opinions. I have a hard time believing that Crystal will approach that conversation with Marianne in the same way that she approached it with RFK. So let's just go ahead and play this here. We're going to break it down kind of piece by piece.
Let me ask you about vaccines. This is an area where you and I have significant differences. And, just to level with you on this, like a lot of what you say, I really respond to. I think you're a very genuine person, but the across the board, whether you want to call it vaccine skepticism or anti-vax advocacy, which has been a central part of what you've been up to for the past number of years. For me personally, it's an issue, and it's a real sort of red line. And I know I'm not alone in that, especially running in a Democratic primary. There are going to be other millions of people like me who have similar concerns. So how do you win them over? What's your message to people who think like I do?
Well, but just tell me where you think I got it wrong.
Well, I think you get it wrong when you draw a correlation between the rise of things like autism and the introduction of vaccines when there isn't hard scientific evidence tying those things together.
How do you know? Let me ask you this. How do you know there's not a hard scientific evidence?
Well, because the one major study that purported to show that was retracted, and the scientist who conducted it was,
Now, what you're doing now,
basically
Crystal,
fraudulently created. Listen,
no.
Hold on.
You're
But
raising this
I
issue.
don't want to get in a debate with you about this because you've spent your life pulling out this, studying that. I will tell you. Let me just tell you.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Let me just tell you.
I'm not.
I've listened to hours of interviews with you with an open mind, and I'm not persuaded. Now, maybe I'm wrong. That's possible. I'll hold it out there. People can watch. I thought Megyn Kelly did a phenomenal interview with you that went through all these claims piece by piece by piece. I really encourage people to watch that whole exchange because we won't be able to do it justice here in the 5 minutes we have left.
So you bring up a very contentious and deep topic, but you don't want to get into a debate about it. And to be honest, you didn't come prepared for it. You didn't come prepared, right? Now, what RFK says when it comes to autism and things like that, as it pertains to vaccines, is that there are a lot of things that happened in the mid to late 80s when this stuff started to change. Chronic illness, things like autism, Tourette's, ADHD, different autoimmune diseases and chronic illnesses began to skyrocket, right? When he was young, he talks about how it was like 1 in 10 or 1 in 30,000 people were autistic. Now it's 1 in 35. Things like chronic illnesses, like 65% of people in the United States have some kind of chronic illness. That's something that the NIH and the CDC, these people should be very concerned about and investing tons of money and time and resources into understanding. And they are not. There's something to be said for that. Now, what is causing these things? Because the research isn't being done by these primary institutions, these centralized authorities within our government, since that research isn't being done by them, and they don't have an incentive to understand that because they essentially work as incubators for pharmaceutical companies. That's what they do now. They're offshoots of big business. They don't have an incentive in understanding these things. It's too complicated. There's not a pill to fix it. And it would require transparency and accountability, which is what Robert F. Kennedy should be focused on here, is transparency and accountability, right? And those two words should be burned into everybody's brain who listens to him, because that's what we want, right? If we have transparency and the method and the machinery for accountability, then we, the people, can make decisions as we see fit when it comes to electing officials and representatives and so on. And I think legal protections are also a part of that, right? That's a barrier to accountability. So when you think about that, I don't understand if Crystal is opposed to these companies being faced with transparency and accountability. It seems like someone who has such an issue with corporate power, profit motives, would be really open-minded to someone, even if they disagree on the science, to someone who's going to force transparency and accountability for corporations, for major corporations who have been siphoning money from the federal government, our money, right? That seems like it's out of integrity for me, whether or not you agree with the science or not. And what RFK says is it may be vaccines, it may be glyphosate from high fructose corn syrup, which also became very popular in the late 80s. It could be a lot of things, flame retardants, different chemicals that are in cosmetics. It could be there's so many things here that are illegal other places for good reason, right? And that's why our health outcomes are awful. So doesn't really handle this in good faith. And it hurts me to say this because I do have a lot of respect for Crystal, and it was kind of a fall from grace in a certain way. And she brings up the Megyn Kelly interview. And I want to show you this part of the Megyn Kelly interview where she discusses kind of her relationship and understanding of RFK. So check this out.
But I said this before when you were on. I've had an evolution on you. I remember being on the chairlift with a friend of mine in December of 2021, I think it was. And she was reading your book. And anyway, it was a few months before I interviewed you. And I said, you should be careful because, you sort of, if you take in the wrong information, then you're saying the wrong thing to everybody. And she was like, well, he has some really interesting things to say. You might want to look at it. So I did. started looking at your book, started reading it, started looking up the sources that you cited in support, then went to my team and said, let's check his sources. Let's see what other people say about his sources. Is he citing the right sources? And turned into this long interview we did. And your claims checked out. The most controversial stuff that you get labeled a kook for saying, checked out time after time after time. And this is not a full endorsement of everything you've ever said, but my takeaway was this guy has been unfairly maligned by people who are so pro-vaccine that they just needed to silence him. So it works to the point where there's a fair amount of people who say like, oh, he's a kook. My friends at National Review, we pulled it just not to insult you, but Jim Garrity, who I really like, said, you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And there's similar, but I'll bet you he hasn't done half the work my team and I have to actually see whether that's true. So this censorship actually does have a negative effect on you.
That's one way to look at it, right? Because a lot of the claims check out, you know? And Crystal says that he doesn't want to hear it. But let's continue this Breaking Points interview with RFK.
But there are going to be people like me who aren't persuaded and who see this as an issue. And the fact that it's been such a central part of your advocacy means I can't just sort of put it to the side and say, oh, well, I'll just ignore, this piece that's been.
So here's what's going on here. And this is my kind of like conjecture on this as someone who is relatively fascinated and loves to study human behavior. What Crystal's trying to do is justify her own choices. As a parent, right? I can see how you make decisions because you think they're the best for your children. And it's very uncomfortable to maybe wrap your mind around the fact that you may have made the wrong choice for your kids or for yourself. And when confronted with that, the immediate response is defensiveness and becoming emotional. And there's nothing about this, what Crystal's presenting here, that's not emotional. This is an emotional response. It's measured, but it's emotionally driven, not logically driven. It's not driven by science or facts or data. It's driven by her emotions. To confront the fact that you may have injected your kid with shit they didn't need or been kind of conned into something that was driven by profit motives, right? Which you would think as someone who is critical of capitalism would be able to wrap their mind around that, right? But that's hard for a parent to do. And as somebody who has repeated that the COVID jab saved bajillions of lives over and over again, maybe for the YouTube censors, maybe because that makes her feel comfortable in believing that, I don't know. But I can see how it's hard to accept this reality that's so far away from what you've been told to believe. And I think that's where the emotion is coming from. And I totally understand. That's why people get so upset about this childhood vaccine thing. I think it's why people are so emotionally invested, because especially that certain parents just have this need to like emotionally defend every choice they make as if every choice they made was the right choice. And I will tell you this, as a parent of a 4-month-old kid, 4.5-month-old, there are things that I did that I probably could have done better, right? Already. And I'm not even half a year in yet. And being open to what you can do better and what you may have gotten wrong is, in my opinion, a key to growth. And I think this emotional defensiveness that's being displayed by Crystal right now is limiting her understanding of a complex issue and not doing her credibility any favors in the process.
Really important to you in your life. So you're running in a Democratic primary. You have a lot of people who feel even more strongly than me who think that, Dr. Fauci is a hero and all of these things. How are you going to persuade them? How are you going to reach them? And what is your message to them?
Well, first of all, I'm not leading with, my opinions about vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
What I say to people is show me where I got it wrong. Show me where I got my science wrong. I've written books about this. I wrote a book about the link between thimerosal and autism that has, I think, 450 distilled scientific studies that confirm and validate that hypothesis, and 1,400 references. And if I got something wrong, show me where it is.
But I think people have shown you where things are wrong, but you don't want to hear it. Is because I've seen, numerous fact checks. Dr. Vinay Prasad,
Vinay Prasad's fact check of him on the All In podcast was really good, and I recommend you guys go check it out. The criticisms he has were very mild and on the periphery. They really didn't confront any hard, big revelations at all.
Really respect on the COVID vaccine. He went through your interview with All In. He did a fact check. I mean, it's not.
And I
people
did a
have
fact check of Vinay, and you should read that.
I will take a look at it, but I don't think that it's fair to say nobody has ever pointed out anything that's been wrong.
Well, here's what people complain about what I say. And again, I'm not leading on this issue, so people can either take it or leave it. But if you want to, what you just said about me, that I'm sort of hard-headed and stubborn and just won't give in, you're wrong about that. If somebody shows me where I'm wrong, I'm going to correct it. And, we have probably the most robust fact-checking operation now in North America. I have 350 PhD scientists and MD physicians on, CHD's advisory board, including until recently, Luc Montagnier won the Nobel Prize for discovering the HIV virus. Chris Portier, who's the head of the National Toxicity Program at NIH, formerly, probably the top toxicologist in America. And if I were saying things that were scientifically unsound, those people would not stay with us. What I would say to you is, show me where I got it wrong. Show me a study where I got wrong, and I will change my position. Science is fluid. It's not an embarrassment to me if there's a new scientific study that I haven't seen that comes out and says I'm wrong. That's what you're supposed to do with science. But what I'm saying to you, nobody has done that. If Vinay Prasad, when he did his piece, if he showed me science that was valid, I would say I would change my position.
If we got the two of you together,
read my response to him.
So you say this isn't what you're leading with, but I just have to say, as someone who is watching your candidacy closely and is aware of the advocacy you've been doing and the organization that you are involved with, it's hard for me to believe this won't be an important part of how you govern. So I think that's the most important piece for people to get. Who you have to accept, there are going to be people like me who just don't agree with you on this. You certainly understand that there are many who do think that the vaccines that we have are more beneficial than harmful, that, got their kids vaccinated and are happy for that decision.
See? They got their kids vaccinated, they're happy for it, and they believe this. That's the language of religion. That's not the language of science. You don't believe in science. Science exists outside of your belief. God, on the other hand, religion, yeah, you can be happy that you brought your kids up in the church and that you instilled these values, whatever, because you believe in them. Yeah, that's cool, whatever. But that's a belief-based situation. Science is not belief-based. Science does not change whether or not you believe in it. It just is. So you can see this here. It's like that was a window into this emotional response that we're seeing.
So how is this going to impact the way that you govern, or does it not at all?
I mean, I'm going to govern according to, what evidence-based medicine. That's
So
the way.
let me give a specific question. If there's another pandemic, in the last pandemic, former President Trump, something we gave him a lot of credit for, he launched Operation Warp Speed. They had a whole of government approach. They used the mRNA technology that was developed using, U.S. taxpayer dollars to get a vaccine out to the population as quickly as possible. How would your approach have differed?
My approach would have been a science-based approach.
Which means what?
Which means and a medicine-based approach, the approach that has been used for, and approved for decades. You look first at therapeutics that are off the shelf, and you look at the efficacy of those. I mean, what I would have done if I was in power then, I would have created an information grid, because now we have this internet that is supposed to benefit us and has become instead an instrument for, totalitarian control. But let's use it for something good. Let's link all 15 million scientists, doctors, frontline physicians all over the world, and find out what they're doing to treat this new respiratory virus. And find out what they're saying is working and not working, and then test that with science, and then turn it instantaneously into protocols and recommendations for other scientists.
So would a vaccine development...
Crystal with this vaccine shit. So what he's saying there is creating an information grid. So you have 15 million kind of frontline doctors who are on the ground. By the way, Fauci, Birx, these people, they didn't treat a single COVID patient, right? But there are people out there that we're treating COVID patients. We're trying different things. And that just like in a market, right? You have different ideas. Different ideas have merit, have value. You try different things. That's what science is, right? You try this, see if this works. What are the trend lines doing? What is the information saying? Oh, this seems like it may be working. Let's test this and see if it works. What are the benefits? What are the costs? And you have that constant dialogue, which is easy to do when you have that many data points, right? Millions and millions of people treating millions and millions of people. That all could have been done, right? Via technology. And we had the access to do that. But what we leaned towards was a centralized authoritarian protocol, which gives us no variation. And what you want in science is variation. You don't want all the countries doing the same thing. You want people trying different stuff. You want different states trying different things and seeing what works, right? And now the reason you would want a centralized control of something like that is so that you wouldn't have to be accountable for your mistakes, because everybody would be making the same mistakes and have the same blind spots. But with variety and variation and more nuance in the way this is handled, you can see, okay, this worked, that worked, and then you can take data from that into the next situation that may be similar and then apply that as necessary there. What we saw through the pandemic was that a centralized response is the wrong idea. Right? What they're trying to do with the WHO and these different organizations to have one response to a respiratory virus is moronic. It's a terrible idea, and it will cost lives. What you want is a varied response and as many data points as you can gather as quickly as possible to have an adequate response to something that as catastrophic as COVID was early on. So when you look at it, and then Crystal doesn't even address any of that and goes, would vaccine development be a part of this response? She's so invested in Pfizer and Moderna. It melts my brain. Like, why? What allegiance do you have to these major, gigantic corporations who have been gobbling up public money? What did they do for you, Crystal? What did they do for you? It's so outside of like what I respect about this person. It seems like she's taking one thing and letting it break her principles into a million pieces. And I cannot for the life of me understand it.
Well, I don't think the vaccine worked. I think, if you think it worked, then try to explain to me the countries that were unvaccinated did much better than our
many of those countries, because there are a lot of different factors in various countries. So a lot of those countries, as you pointed out before,
why do we have the highest death rate in the world by far?
I think there are a lot of factors that may go into that. One of them is the fact that we are disproportionately obese as a society.
Okay, so let's discuss that, right? We're disproportionately obese as a society. Well, maybe the fact that we allow things in our food that tend to make people obese, we have a food addiction and essentially a drug cartel that is producing our food. We lean into that, right? And then what do we use to solve the problems that are caused by our food? We wind back around the pharmaceutical industry. So maybe big food and big pharma are in some kind of shared interest collusion here to increase their profits. But in the meantime, Crystal Ball is going to parrot the talking points of that industry that is profiting off of obesity and sickness that's being created by our food industry. So what are you doing here, Crystal? Like, what's the end goal here? Are you defending the system that makes people fat and sick, that has them reliant on pharmaceutical drugs? Organizations and human beings run on incentives, right? So the food industry is incentivized to have people sticking as much of their shit in their mouths as possible. And the pharmaceutical industry is incentivized to have you taking as many of their pills and shots as you possibly can, right? So, Crystal, my question for you in this situation is, what is your incentive here? How are you incentivized? Because you don't work for MSNBC anymore, right? So Pfizer's not running ads on your show. So you have no reason to be beholden to them. And if anything, you have an incentive to be critical and skeptical of corporate interests. But it seems like in this one area of your life, that is turned upside down completely.
We have the negative health outcomes that you've been talking about. We don't go outside as much as countries, say in Africa. I mean, there are a lot of different factors that may play into that. But I will say, did the vaccines work in the way they were initially promised to prevent spread? No, I don't think so, especially once you got to later variants. But we have a lot of data that shows that in terms of reducing severe hospitalization and death, the vaccines were really important. And maybe there was a cost-benefit analysis.
I want to see that data. I know that's what the industry says.
There is lots of data, and not just from here, from around the world, that shows the vaccine doses, and not just our vaccines, but ones that were created all around the world, reduce severe hospitalization and death. So in that way, yes, I do very much believe that they work.
And let me tell you something. What I believe you're doing now is you're parroting what the public health agencies have been saying, but they do not have a scientific basis for that. And I have another book out that you should look at called Died Suddenly, that goes through all the Johns Hopkins data, which is the dashboard data that everybody uses, and shows exactly what happened when first of all, the vaccine, the Case Western study that is probably the largest, most recent, shows that at most the vaccine gives you a very, very small amount of protection, and that after 7 months, you go into negative efficacy. So you are more, if you got vaccinated, you're more likely to get sick, you're more likely to get severe illness, and you're more likely to die than if you were unvaccinated.
I have not seen that. I have seen study after study that shows the opposite. Listen, I don't want to get bogged down in this because
you don't want to get bogged down. You also don't want to listen. You don't want to be challenged. You want to be right. That's what you want to be, Crystal. You want to be right. And it's so abundantly obvious in this video.
I don't think we're going to see eye to eye here. And we have some other questions we want to get to, and your time is short. But we'll put in post, please send us what you're looking at.
Yeah, we're happy
We'll put what I'm looking at, and people can judge for themselves.
I want to put this out there too, because I don't think that Crystal really wraps her mind around the perception of this. And Crystal and Sagar, love them both. Like I said, I'm being critical here because I feel like I'm in integrity to be critical here. But they have DC brain. Like when it came to the vaccine stuff and COVID stuff, they were in alignment with what people in DC thought. And again, if you live in an environment and you're constantly surrounded by that environment, you're going to take on characteristics of that environment, right? I think if Sagar lived in College Station, Texas still, right, and his life was minimally impacted by COVID, he probably wouldn't have gotten vaccinated. The dude was caring about his health. He was getting fit. He was doing his things. Crystal was a collegiate swimmer, probably has better lung function than 99.9% of Americans. Didn't need that shit, right? Pretty straightforward, right? Both of them were also young. And to Sagar's credit, the dude got his shit together at the beginning of COVID. Like, he's gotten exponentially healthier since then. So props to him for that. But when you think about the things that Crystal seems to really care about, right? The healthcare system, all these things. Let's just take Medicare for all for one. I'm somebody who was pretty open to the idea of a single payer system. I have been more open to a public option than a Medicare for all system like what Bernie, but I was always skeptical of that. Never thought it was actually reasonable. And RFK said the same thing. It was it's just politically kind of impossible. So let's work with what we can work with here. That being said, after the experience with the pandemic, I'll be damned. I will actually fight against a Medicare for all program. As somebody who was open to it and kind of would hear arguments on it and knew that maybe, look at other countries and different things, and their results, and you have people Ben Shapiro will say, because Israel has a public healthcare system that's really good. He's it's a great place to get a broken arm. It's a terrible place to have cancer. And it's well, we can maybe look at why cancer rates are so high and do that kind of information. And maybe the incentives change, and maybe that leads to better regulations in the food industry. There's a lot of different things that could downstream third, fourth order effects to that I think could be beneficial. And I would rather not have to pay $30,000 to have a kid, $50,000 if you break your arm. That's absurd. That is absolutely corrupt and absurd and disgusting, right? All that being said, if you think that if we had public health care, right? Whatever system, Germany, fill in the blank, whichever one you want to use as the model for what a quality public healthcare system looks like, right? Probably not Canada, Israel, etc., Australia. If you think that our healthcare availability would not have been contingent on our vaccine status during COVID, you're delusional. They would have taken that shit away from you if you were unvaccinated so fast it would have made your head spin. Because that's all they were doing. They were coercing people into taking a drug. They were coercing you. I get more DMs from people who got vaccinated early, thought it was the right thing to do, and were like, wow, I just got fucking conned. And you did. you did. If you were a healthy person and the value proposition didn't really line up, you got conned. And that's okay, because the deck was stacked against you. You know, there's nothing to be ashamed of, but it is data to take forward in your life and maybe put that filter on some other decisions you make in the future. That's the best you can do, right? What's done is done. But that response to COVID absolutely put Medicare for all in the ground. It's dead. It's done. Don't care if Marianne likes it. Don't care what Bernie has to say. Could not give a less. That shit is done. Absolutely dead. And the fact that you're clinging on to it at this point is a joke. But you won't put the two together, even though that marriage is so abundantly obvious. And you can't even hold the people who were responsible for that accountable. So that's where we're at with that. It's really frustrating for me to see this. Like and if you just, like, we can just look at the comments here real quick. Like it's where they at? They're down here. Crystal is a perfect example of how it's easier to fool people than it is to convince them they have been fooled. That's the number one comment, 1.5 thousand likes. Crystal just lost me. Crystal, it's really important we address this issue on vaccines. RFK, okay, let's get into the details of your criticism. Crystal, oh, we don't have time for that. Oh, man. Been a fan since Rising. I can't believe how unprepared Crystal was to talk about this. Wow, I'm shocked Crystal actually denied him the chance to provide information. She really just cut him off like CNN without even going to commercial break. Yeah, this is the takes you get from CNN and MSNBC. If I want these kind of this kind of dialogue and this kind of discourse, I'll go to MSNBC or CNN. That's where I'll go. Crystal is doing exactly what she accused him of doing. Every time he tries to tell her she's wrong, she just won't hear it. Relieved to read about the absolute majority of people feeling the same way about this interview. I wonder if Crystal will provide the, quote, scientific papers she referred to, because I know RFK can back up his claims. On this topic, Crystal comes across as pro-establishment, pro-deception propagandist, while RFK Jr. comes across as measured, rational, and science-based. Well done, RFK Jr. Keep up the great work. Shouting over them, not letting them speak, able to cite one factual study to back her arguments is the perfect way to interview a presidential candidate. This really helped strengthen my interest in voting for RFK Jr. It's amazing how long how long form style interview suddenly was running out of time at the key moment RFK's arguments against Crystal. Yeah, so you see this, and also look at this here. They got ratioed 20,000 down, thumbs down, 3.4K thumbs up. Now, I will say this: they've done more than most outlets as far as giving RFK room and time to speak. But if you didn't want to have an actual discourse around the vaccine issue, you should not have brought it up, Crystal. And if you were not prepared to do that, you shouldn't have brought it up. Now, I know you think you're right, and that's fine. But a lot of people are equally as convinced as you are about this, about libertarianism. That doesn't mean that they're correct and that you don't have valid points. And I wish that you could turn the emotion down a little bit and try and look at this and be relatively objective as you can be, even though it's very difficult, and really handle this like a journalist, because that's not how you handle this. And that's coming from somebody who's a big fan. I pay a yearly subscription for this. And I'm happy to do it. I support what you guys do, but this was this needs to be actually addressed and not just walked past. Because you don't have advertisers, right? It'd be different if you were shilling for your advertisers, and that you got to do what you got to do. But your incentive is providing real journalism to people who care about real journalism, and that is not what happened here today.